Hi and welcome to a slightly different sky practice. Today I've divided my paper into 4 with masking tape. My board's at my normal angle of 45 degrees. So this gives me 4 different areas for a different sky practice in each. And this can be a really fun way of doing it. You can do smaller ones like this in your sketchbooks or divide a larger piece of paper up in the same way with masking tape or maybe washi tape, which doesn't damage the paper. I'm going to be using Davidson's pigments, and those are our new handmade watercolours, but you can use any paints you like for this. And these small paintings are perfectly suited to pans or half pans. So the 2 that I'm going to be using for the first 2 scenes are Cobalt Blue and Raw Sienna, 2 of my favourite colours. The Cobalt Blue is beautiful clean blue and granulates nicely, and it's perfect for a beautiful atmospheric sky. So the first sky I'm going to be painting wet on dry paper. This is a very watery mix of the Raw Sienna using my size 14 Escoda synthetic round brush. And now on goes a sort of fairly watery mixture of the Cobalt Blue, increasing it, dipping into the pan and just increasing the depth of the hue there across the top, allowing it to begin to blend into the wet raw sienna wash that went on first, and allowing the paint to become sort of a bit paler near to the bottom, and using the brush dried off on a cloth first to then scrub through and help blend some of those clouds, keeping soft and hard edges, and then straight into the pan again for a little bit more strong cobalt blue. Just get a bit more into the top, and then working around that sky a little bit more with just a very dry, almost dry, damp brush. Everything will dry back a lot lighter, and I'm hoping that I'm going to end up with quite a subtle sky where there's a little bit of colour blending with the raw sienna, which is a sort of a pale brown yellow. Where it mixes with the blue, you can see we've got some lovely, very delicate sort of cloud shadows have begun to appear just from the natural mixing of those pigments on the page. So I'm not going to touch that again, and then now I'm going to start on the second sky practice. Now this is going to be another wet on dry, and this time I'm going to start off with a creamy but slightly sort of fairly watery mix of paint, and I've mixed plenty up, and using the same brush I'm creating a flat wash. Because my board's at an angle, the paint may run down a little bit. I may get some slight gradations, but not going to get too much. And the idea here is to just make this sky practice sort of beautiful clear blue sky, again using the cobalt blue, and then I'm going to take a clean damp synthetic flat brush and lift out some clouds. It's very important here that your brush is clean and damp, and then you just sort of push it and wiggle it around through the paint, clean it off, and then dry it on a cloth, and then go back in and pull a bit more out until you're happy with your cloud shapes. This can take a bit of practice. Sometimes you can pull too much out, or other times you find you're using something like a phthalo blue or a Prussian blue, which can stain the page, so it doesn't work so well. But something like an ultramarine or a cobalt blue is absolutely perfect for this method, and you get these beautiful soft white fluffy clouds. And because you're lifting out paint and moisture from the page, you're ending up with some soft and hard edges, and then a little tiny bit of tissue just on the edge of some of the larger clouds gives me that sort of really nice bright white just on the top of the clouds. Just take that one off over the tape there, and then leave that one to dry too. So if you're interested in looking at the Davidson's pigments, follow the link below to our Etsy shop. Right, now the next two skies are going to be more experimental. I want sort of stormy skies or sort of slightly more dramatic cloudy skies, but I'm not quite sure how I'm going to approach it. I know I'm going to use these colours, and this is the Raw Sienna, Prussian Blue and Burnt Umber, and I'll probably use a bit of Davidson's Grey at the end, but I forgot to take a photograph of that. You can use Paynes Grey instead of the Davidson's Grey. So I've mixed up quite a strong puddle of each on my mixing plate, and using my Escoda size 14 synthetic mop brush, I'm going to start off just putting the paint on the paper, sort of any old how. I've got all three colours on my brush. This is kind of, as I say, a more experimental approach. I've got no idea what I'm going to end up with. I might have to layer this one up a bit. So I'm dipping straight into the pan. You can see how beautiful and rich that Prussian blue is. So I want to add a bit of the burnt umber into the Prussian blue so that it sort of mixes wet in wet onto the paint, which was originally applied wet onto dry paper. But now, as you can see, apart from the bottom, which I'm now wetting with a little bit of extra water and thinning the paint out, now the whole page is wet, so anything that I paint now will be using the wet in wet process, where things will softly diffuse because my board's at an angle. It'll run down the page. The idea at the moment is just to keep working at this sky until I see a direction that I want to go in, and I haven't seen that yet. So I'm going to strengthen up the Prussian blue even more, dipping into the pan. You can see how rich and creamy the paint is. It's staying mostly where I place it because it's thicker than the, or rather drier and richer than what's already on the page. Spraying it now to get the paint to run. So I'm spraying it with my water spray. Remember, if you're experimenting with 4 pieces like this, don't use your water spray on a painting on the top, because the last thing you want is for the paint to run down onto the painting below. So I'm now stopping the run of the paint with the flat brush, pulling it across sort of in a sort of shallow diagonal, and just again seeing what happens. And now I've decided to lift out some clouds with a tissue, and when I use a tissue and dab it quite hard, it not only lifts out the paint, but it lifts off a lot of the moisture as well, almost drying out the page completely. So it gives me some nice hard edges, and it may give me the look that I want and allow me to begin layering up my sky, because I can paint into those drier areas almost straight away. And hopefully I can build up some interesting layers that give me that look of dark, sort of stormy clouds. So now I'm adding in, into the drier areas, I'm adding in the burnt umber. Just here and there, trying to sort of make it look like cloud shadows and layers of cloud. I'm not convinced it's working, but if I carry this across the whole page, then I may begin to see the layers looking better. So this sort of practice is quite experimental. Again, back in with the tissue. You can see that I'm lifting some of that back out again. And it's not really shaping up to give me anything that I'm liking very much. So I think drastic action is called for. This is really rich Prussian blue. Let's put this across the page, sweeping it across in horizontal brush strokes, bold brush strokes across the entire painting, and then letting the paint run out, adding a bit of water so that it sort of thins out and becomes a graduated wash, but with some of those colours that I applied earlier showing through the wash. And I'm much happier with this. I just need to darken up the top with a really rich, creamy consistency burnt umber, and just trust that that will diffuse into the Prussian blue wash and give me that sort of atmospheric approaching storm cloud that I'm looking for. Only time will tell as it dries. So now I'm going to paint wet in wet, and I'm using a different brush this time for the final painting. It's a size 5 Davidson synthetic spin brush, and I've wet the whole page, and now I'm going for a dramatic storm this time. And again, this is going to be experimental. This is just going to be doing anything and seeing what happens. Something that I'm really have no investment in. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. If it does work, then I can take some of the methods and things that I did into future paintings. But if it doesn't work, then it doesn't really matter. I will have had a lot of fun. So that was a bit of raw sienna, quite weak, across the page, the wet page first. And now this is Davidson's Grey. You can use Paynes Grey for this. Our Davidson's Grey is this really rich, incredibly dark grey when it's thick and creamy, but it thins out to a very sort of beautiful pale bluish grey. And you can see that I'm applying a lot of different tones here. I'm really sort of trying to get those churning, boiling storm clouds here and see what happens when I use paint boldly. I may have to layer this one up, I think. So I'm just trying to get an interesting first layer. So the paint has gone on, and now I'm dabbing it out in places, quite drastically in some places, to sort of give me an interesting underlayer, which I can then go back into when it's dry. So now I'm going to leave everything to dry and then come back and continue with this fourth painting. Please note that at the time of filming, our Davidson's Grey is completely sold out in the shop, but we're going to be making some more as it proved to be very popular. So now I've mixed up some more Davidson's Grey, and I'm painting with my Escoda synthetic mop brush, wet on the dry painting, and pulling across this next layer of quite richly pigmented paint, but still allowing plenty of that underwash to show through. And moving the pigment around so that the tonal values change. Some areas are darker, and I've lightened out and spread out other areas. Now this is my Prussian blue, so really adding a lot of this rich Prussian blue across the middle and the bottom and the edges of some of these clouds, trying to define some cloud shapes now as my sort of final layer. And I can clean and dry my brush off and use the damp brush just to soften certain areas as well. And now I'm mixing up a really rich mixture again of my Davidson's Grey, and I'm dropping that into the clouds that are now wet in wet. And you can see that this richly pigmented grey is beginning to gently diffuse and soften, and these clouds are becoming more and more defined. Apologies if you can hear a faint rumbling in the background, but my coffee, my stovetop coffee maker, is telling me that it's just about ready. So I think I'm becoming a bit happier with this one now. The layers are working together. I just need to refine it a little bit. Again, with a clean damp brush, I want a little bit of blue across the top there, less of the white and more pale blue. And the lovely thing about any brand of Prussian blue is that you can dilute it down to the most prettiest shade of sky blue. So that's just like a little bit of faint blue sky peeping through these storm clouds. then just a bit of dark round the bottom, and then softening it back a little bit. And then finally, a little bit of lifting using a tissue across a few little areas, just where I think it needs softening back a bit more, but not too much. And then I can leave that one to dry, and I think I'm going to go back to number 3, and I'm looking at number 3, and I think it looks like a seascape. So I'm going to add a bit of sea to the base of sky number 3, just to see how it'll look. So this is a medium consistency or quite watery mixture of Prussian blue with the Pro Art Harky brush dragged across about a third of the way up on top of the dry painting, just to give me that horizon line and sea. And then I can work through the paint and create a bit of variation using horizontal brush strokes, just using the chisel end tip of the Harky brush. And then a clean, damp, flat brush, it must be clean and damp, just to straighten up and slightly soften that horizon line, drawing it across, keeping it as straight as I can. And then I can use the flat brush to put in a little bit of extra tone, just to give the idea and the impression on the water of just a few little waves and ripples and things. Something and nothing really, just for fun, to finish off this painting and put something below one of these skies at least. And then I'm going to wash out my brush completely and wipe off the excess moisture, and then use it to lift out some slightly paler horizontal marks to put a little bit of light back into the water between those darker strips. That all helps to contribute to the illusion that I've painted water. So now I need to leave it to dry completely, then I can remove the masking tape and have a look at these sky practices. And here they are with their clean white borders, and I hope you'll agree they've all turned out quite well. The top two were a little bit easier, nice simple exercises in sort of painting wet onto dry. If we look closely at this one, this is the one that was done just with scrubbing the paint on with the brush, wet onto dry, and this one we lifted the clouds out with a clean damp flat brush and then a little bit of tissue as well. This one was a bit more of a struggle, an experimental struggle, where we layered up all sorts of different approaches, but finally it came together with that Prussian blue wash, and then putting in a little bit of sea below it. But this is my favourite, and this one I just think is really interesting. I had no idea what I was going to paint. I just let the paint do its thing and just kind of helped it out a little bit here and there. And I'm really intrigued by these effects and the combination of colours there. So I hope you enjoyed that sky practice, and I hope you'll give this sort of thing a go. It can be a great way to save on paper, because you can do this on the back of an old painting, divide it into 4, then you've got 4 different practices, and it's a great way to save a bit of money when you're watercolour painting and learning. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope you'll give something like this a go. It can really help you to progress with your skies, to try out different things quickly and quite experimentally, as well as to practice tried and tested methods. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and click on the bell if you want to see more sky practices, and also look at the playlist, because there's a playlist for sky practices if you're interested in that sort of thing. And finally, thanks so much to my lovely Patreons who support this channel. And I'll see you again soon, and happy painting. Bye.